Have you ever wondered whether the thoughts running quietly through your mind, day after day, might actually be shaping the very conditions of your life? Your money, your friendships, your health, your success? What if the difference between the people who struggle and the people who seem to effortlessly attract good fortune isn't luck at all, but a law as real as consistent and as impersonal as gravity, a law that has been working in your life this entire time, whether you notice it or not? And what the good news is this: once you understand how that law actually works, you can begin, starting today, to use it on purpose instead of by accident. That is the question we are stepping into together right now. Before we begin, let's take a moment to properly meet the man behind these words. Ernest Holmes was an American writer and teacher who became one of the most influential voices in what was called the New Thought movement, a spiritual philosophy that swept through the early 20th century and taught, at its core, that the mind is the builder of our circumstances, not merely a passive witness to them. Holmes had already written an earlier book simply titled Creative Mind, and it struck such a deep chord with readers that he felt compelled to sit down and write a companion volume, one that would take those same foundational ideas and aim them squarely at something every single person cares about: success. And not just success in business, though he does speak to that at real length and with real practical detail. He means success in friendship, success in health, success in inner peace, and above all, success in that deep, quiet confidence of a person who knows, beyond any doubt, that they are not merely a victim of circumstance. Holmes wrote this book in 1919, in a world just emerging from war, uncertain, weary, and searching for something solid to hold on to. And into that uncertain world, he makes a remarkably bold claim that there is one power in the universe, that this power is fundamentally mental and spiritual rather than physical, and that every single one of us, whether we realize it or not, is using this power every single day through the simple, constant, ordinary activity of our own thinking. Most people, he says, are using this power completely unconsciously, and so, without ever meaning to, they end up creating the very failure, poverty, or loneliness they most wanted to avoid. But the moment a person begins to understand the law behind all of this, they can start using it consciously, deliberately, and even joyfully to build a life of genuine, lasting success. This is not a dry academic philosophy book, and you'll feel that from the very first page. Holmes writes like a man who deeply, personally wants you to succeed, who genuinely believes in your capacity for greatness, and who simply will not let you off the hook with excuses about your age, your competition, your bad luck, or your difficult circumstances. He meets every single excuse with exactly the same quiet answer. Look within. That's it. That's always the answer he circles back to. It's worth pausing for just a moment longer on why this particular book has continued to resonate with readers for well over 100 years now. Holmes was writing at a moment when science, religion, and psychology were all beginning to overlap in fascinating new ways, and he found himself trying to build a bridge between them, a way of talking about spiritual law that felt as practical and dependable as any law you might find in a physics textbook. He wasn't interested in vague comfort or empty positive thinking for its own sake. He wanted readers to actually see results in their daily lives, in their bank accounts, in their friendships, in their health. And he structured this book almost like a course of study, moving steadily from the largest philosophical questions about the nature of life itself, down to the smallest, most specific daily habits of thought that a person could put into practice starting that very same evening. So find a comfortable spot, take a slow breath, and let's begin this journey together, chapter by chapter, idea by idea. Let's start right at the beginning with a question that sounds almost childlike in its simplicity. What is truth, and where do we even begin looking for it? Holmes tells us that any honest search for truth has to begin, quite simply, with our own direct experience. We know that we exist because we can think, we can feel, and we can speak about our own existence. And if we are alive and conscious of being alive, then life itself must be a real and genuine thing, not some kind of illusion we've all agreed to believe in. Nothing, he reminds us, can ever come from nothing. Since something clearly does exist, right here, right now, whatever that something originally came from must itself be the complete source of everything, ourselves fully included. He calls this source life, with a capital L, and he's careful to insist it isn't something distant, abstract, or unreachable. It is not merely physical in the way a rock or a river is physical, and yet it isn't only mental in some small, limited sense either. It is spiritual in nature, and it is the underlying reason behind absolutely everything we can ever see, hear, touch, taste, or feel. He takes real care here to clarify that the world we experience with our senses is not fake, not some flimsy illusion to be casually waved away or dismissed. The physical world we live in every day is completely, genuinely real. But behind every real, tangible thing, there stands a deeper cause. And if we ever want to truly understand why our own lives look the way they currently do, we have to learn to look past the surface appearance and ask, honestly, what produced it in the first place? This, Holmes explains, is precisely what Jesus meant when he told people not to judge according to appearances, but to judge with right judgment, which simply means learn to look past the surface and perceive the deeper cause sitting quietly behind it. From there, Holmes turns to offer us a wonderfully simple explanation of what life actually is in practical terms. Whatever we see, feel, hear, touch, or taste, and the underlying reason behind it, that, in his words, is life itself. And because absolutely everything that exists came originally out of this one single life, it logically follows that life must flow continuously through every single thing around us. There is no such thing, in his view, as dead, lifeless matter anywhere in this universe. Everything is one unified substance, simply expressing itself through endless, fascinating variety. And the way this one life brings forth all of that variety is through an interactivity that we, as human beings living inside physical bodies, would naturally call thought, God or life or spirit, whichever name feels most comfortable to you personally, makes all things out of itself through a continuous process of self-recognition or self-knowing. There is nothing standing outside this one life to get in its way or slow it down. So whatever this creative power thinks or knows simply and immediately appears, fashioned entirely out of itself. Now here's where the book turns genuinely personal, because Holmes immediately asks the question every reader is secretly waiting for. Where exactly does a human being fit into all of this vast picture? His answer is direct and, honestly, rather beautiful. We are made out of this very same life. We partake fully of its nature, in much the same way a single drop of ocean water partakes of the nature of the entire ocean surrounding it. Man is the center of God within God. Holmes writes, the difference between this greater infinite spirit and one individual person is purely a difference of degree, never a difference of quality or kind. We were never self-made in his understanding. We came directly out of the one life, the exact same way everything else in existence did. And why on earth would this happen at all? Why would an infinite, complete power bother creating individual, limited beings? Holmes freely admits that nobody can fully answer that question with certainty. But he gently suggests that perhaps this great life simply wanted genuine companionship, wanted someone to share itself with, to enjoy the ongoing adventure creation alongside. Man represents the individual expression, he explains, while this greater life represents a universal expression. And just as this universal power governs its enormous, sprawling world, so does each one of us govern our own smaller, individual world, always through that exact same creative process, the quiet, constant power of our own thought. There is no genuine separation possible here, Holmes insists, because there is nothing at all aside from this one shared life for anything to be separated by. If everything that exists is made from the same underlying substance, then absolutely nothing can ever truly come between us and the source we originally came from. That deep inner unity, once it's genuinely realized and felt, becomes a solid foundation for everything else the book goes on to teach. Think about how differently a person moves through the world once they actually believe this, at a gut level, rather than simply nodding along with it as an interesting idea. A person who feels cut off, alone, small, and separate from any greater power will approach every challenge from a place of anxious scarcity. But a person who genuinely feels this unity, who feels that the same creative intelligence that spins galaxies is quietly present within their own chest at this very moment, approaches challenges completely differently. They're not begging some distant deity for scraps of good fortune. They're recognizing a power that was, in Holmes's phrase, given to the Son to have life within himself, exactly as the Father has life within himself. That's an entirely different starting point for approaching a difficult morning, a stalled career, or a lonely season of life. And this naturally raises another honest question about human freedom. Why would this great, generous life create human beings, and then hand each one of us the risky freedom to choose for ourselves, sometimes choosing rather poorly? Holmes answers that if we'd been created without any real power of choice, we wouldn't actually be true individuals at all. We'd be little more than sophisticated machines, going through predetermined motions. Because we are genuinely capable of choosing for ourselves, it must follow that we were designed that way entirely on purpose. And the moment a person truly wakes up to the simple fact, all of their old, tired questions begin quietly dissolving away. They stop feeling like a helpless victim of blind fate, and instead start seeing themselves as a being with real, God-given power, meant all along to work together with the greater law, rather than constantly struggling against it. This naturally leads into an idea Holmes calls the beginning of understanding. If we truly do carry this life within us, and if it really is the exact same nature as the life of the divine itself, and if we are genuinely free individual beings, then it logically follows that we can do with our own lives whatever we sincerely choose to do. We can shape and mold ourselves into whatever we honestly wish to become. But, and this part matters enormously, that freedom only ever exists within law. It is never a lawless, chaotic kind of freedom. Just as the physical world around us runs according to physical laws, our own inner world runs according to mental and spiritual law. And if we go against that law, whether ignorantly or knowingly, we will inevitably feel its natural consequences. Freedom, Holmes explains, comes specifically from understanding the laws of our own being and then consciously choosing to cooperate with them, so that instead of being punished by law, we end up genuinely blessed by it and can direct its considerable power toward health, happiness, and lasting success. Now Holmes gets remarkably practical and asks a question that most people, honestly, never stop to seriously consider, if our conditions truly aren't controlled by our own thinking, then what exactly are they controlled by instead? Some people will insist that outward circumstances control their lives entirely. But circumstances, Holmes points out firmly, are never actually a cause of anything. They're always an effect, always something that follows a much deeper, hidden cause. And behind every single circumstance currently present in your life, you yourself are that deeper cause. There is nothing at all but mind, he insists, and nothing ever moves except as mind moves it. This might sound uncomfortable to hear at first, and Holmes knows it. Nobody genuinely wants to hear that their own failures somehow originated in their own thinking. So he anticipates the natural objection directly. Of course you never sat down and consciously decided to fail, he acknowledges kindly. But somewhere along the way, you likely allowed thoughts of failure or fear or lingering doubt to quietly take root, and the law simply faithfully reflected those exact thoughts right back to you in the form of outward conditions. This law doesn't stop to ask questions, and it certainly doesn't play favorites among us. Whatever pattern of thought we plant, the law faithfully grows into a perfectly matching condition every single time. Holmes calls this the very law that certain traditions refer to as karma, a law that binds the ignorant and simultaneously sets free the wise, simply because it treats every single person with complete impersonal equality. Whatever we think becomes a pattern, and mind is the builder that faithfully takes that pattern and constructs our entire life directly around it. To make this particular idea feel vivid and real, Holmes shares something he personally witnessed in his own work as a practitioner. He once treated a patient suffering from a large, painful growth in her body. Surgeons eventually removed roughly 50 pounds of fluid from her, and yet within just a few days, that growth had fully returned, seemingly out of nowhere, without her eating or drinking anything unusual that could explain it. So where exactly did that returning mass come from? Holmes concludes it had to be a case of unconscious creation, a striking example of thought, entirely without the woman even realizing it, quietly molding itself into physical, tangible form. He uses his rather startling story to make a larger point. Creation, he insists, is happening constantly all around us, whether we're doing it consciously or completely by accident. And the sooner we each learn to deliberately direct the same creative process on purpose, the sooner we can begin bringing into our lives exactly what we genuinely want, rather than whatever we happen to unconsciously fear. Consider how much of daily life actually operates this way, quietly, beneath our notice. A person who constantly rehearses a worry about losing their job, turning it over and over in idle moments throughout the day, is engaged in exactly the same unconscious creative process as that unaware patient. They're not trying to bring about job loss. Nobody would consciously choose that. But the steady, repetitive rehearsal of the fear plants a seed all the same. And mind, Holmes reminds us, does not distinguish between a seed we planted on purpose and one we planted through sheer habit and inattention. This is precisely why he spends so much of the remainder of the book teaching deliberate, conscious practice. Because once you know that creation never actually stops, the only real choice left to you is whether you'll participate in it consciously or continue leaving it entirely to chance and habit. From here, Holmes lays out what he calls the first practical steps toward using this law wisely and effectively. The very first thing to understand is that if any single thought genuinely has the power to manifest into reality, then logically, every single thought we think must carry that exact same power. Mind simply doesn't get to pick and choose which of our countless daily thoughts it takes seriously. and which ones it politely ignores. It receives absolutely everything we hand it and immediately gets to work. The same reliable way rich, fertile soil accepts every single seed placed into it and begins growing whatever was planted there, whether that happens to be a healthy vegetable or a stubborn weed. Every one of us, Holmes explains, carries around a kind of personal thought atmosphere, quietly built from everything we have ever thought, said, or done throughout our entire lives. This surrounding atmosphere decides, almost like an invisible magnet, what gets drawn toward us and what gets pushed firmly away. You've surely noticed this yourself in your own daily life. Some people walk into a room and you immediately feel lifted, encouraged, suddenly capable of doing great and ambitious things. Other people seem to drain the energy right out of the room the moment they enter it. The difference here, Holmes insists, isn't random luck at all. It's the particular mental atmosphere each person happens to be carrying with them. One built solidly on confidence and inner strength, the other steeped uncomfortably in doubt, worry, and fear. Holmes is refreshingly blunt about negative thinking throughout this section. He flatly refuses to accept poverty or failure as some kind of unavoidable, permanent condition for anyone at all. He genuinely believes with real conviction that the exact same creative power available to the wealthy and successful is equally available to the struggling and discouraged, and he points out, somewhat provocatively for his era, that no amount of charity alone will ever truly cure poverty, because poverty is, at its very root, fundamentally a condition of consciousness rather than circumstance. The far greater kindness, he suggests, is patiently teaching someone how to think differently, rather than simply handing them a temporary, well-meaning handout. Naturally, the next logical question becomes, how, exactly, do we go about building genuine strength of mind? Holmes offers us a simple, practical test here. Ask yourself honestly, is life itself weak? Is the infinite source behind all things ever truly discouraged or defeated? If the honest answer is no, then neither logically are you, because you fully share in that exact same underlying nature. He wants you to know with complete confidence that you are strong with the very strength of the infinite itself, and that once you genuinely see and accept this truth, weak or fearful thoughts simply cannot hold their ground against you any longer. To help keep your personal mental atmosphere pointed firmly in the right direction, Holmes suggests you carefully watch your own thinking at first, resolutely refusing to dwell on anything you would not actually want to experience showing up in your life. Speak only the words and think only the thoughts that you genuinely want reflected back to you. And whatever mistakes remain sitting in your past, forgive them completely, both in yourself and in every other person involved, and then let them go entirely. He famously reminds us, in his own resolute phrasing, that we are the masters of our own fate and the captains of our own souls. It's worth sitting with how radical this claim actually felt, coming right after a devastating world war, when so many people around Holmes had genuinely good reason to feel that fate, circumstance, and forces entirely beyond their control were the only real deciding factors in human life. Holmes wasn't naive about suffering. He simply refused to accept that suffering had to be the final word on any individual life going forward. Strength, in his framework, isn't a personality trait some people happen to be born with and others simply lack. It's a decision, renewed quietly, moment by moment, to align your thinking with the actual nature of the life within you, rather than with the frightened chatter of the moment. This naturally brings him to a chapter exploring what exactly we end up attracting into our lives. Thought, Holmes explains carefully, isn't merely some abstract mental exercise happening quietly inside our heads. It actually has real, tangible form. It carries real, measurable power, and the outward conditions we eventually draw toward ourselves will match our inner mental pictures with truly striking precision. A person working in business, he explains, absolutely needs to hold on to thoughts of cheerfulness, hope, and quiet confidence rather than depression or worry, because these underlying attitudes ripple steadily outward and end up shaping virtually everything the person touches throughout their day. He urges the reader to consciously blot out false, limiting beliefs one at a time, quite deliberately, much the way a careful gardener might pull weeds out of an otherwise healthy garden bed. Whenever an old, fearful thought inevitably returns, look directly at it and calmly tell it, in no uncertain terms, that it no longer belongs to you. You are genuinely free of it now, and you must hold firmly to that hard-won freedom. Next, Holmes goes considerably deeper into what he calls the power of attraction. Since spirit makes absolutely everything out of itself by simply becoming the very thing it wills itself to become, we, as individuals sharing that same nature, are meant to use this identical creative method in our own lives. You can only ever attract, he insists, what you have first genuinely mentally become and truly felt yourself to already be, without any lingering shadow of doubt remaining. A steady, consistent stream of confident thought sent continuously into the surrounding creative mind produces a correspondingly steady, consistent result out in the world. A wavering, doubtful, inconsistent stream of thought, on the other hand, inevitably produces a wavering, uncertain, disappointing result. We are all immersed, he explains, in a kind of deeply personal aura, quietly built from everything we've ever thought, said, or done throughout our lives. And this surrounding aura decides precisely what gets drawn toward us and what gets gently repelled away. Once we genuinely understand this underlying law, our job becomes wonderfully simple, though admittedly not always easy in practice. Consciously embody exactly what we want, hold our attention there with quiet discipline, and fully let go of the old, outdated patterns entirely. This isn't at all a job suited for the weak-willed or the easily distracted. Holmes cautions us honestly. It genuinely takes a strong, self-reliant, one-pointed mind to succeed here, but the eventual results are more than worth the required discipline. And importantly, he adds, this practice should never feel like strain or exhausting struggle. When we truly, deeply know there is only ever one single power at work in the universe, we naturally stop fighting against imagined obstacles and simply rest instead in calm, quiet, settled certainty. That naturally leads into a warm, genuinely human chapter about how to attract real, lasting friendship. Holmes teaches that the person who sincerely learns to love everyone around them, without a single exception, will inevitably find plenty of love returned generously to them in kind. This isn't mere sentimentality to him at all. He insists it's a precise, almost scientific principle at work. Since everything ultimately is mind, and we only ever attract what we first genuinely become ourselves, until we actively send love outward, we simply cannot expect to receive love back in return. If you happen to find yourself currently without close friends, he gently suggests sending your thought out toward the entire world, filled completely with warmth and genuine goodwill, trusting patiently that somewhere out there, someone equally longing for that same connection will naturally be drawn toward you in time. He asks us to firmly drop the common habit of thinking anyone is strange, difficult, or somehow different from us, because that particular kind of judgment only breeds deeper misunderstanding and pushes people further and further away over time. Think of the entire world as your genuine friend, he encourages. But remember that you must also, in turn, be a true friend to that entire world. The person who consistently sees good in others and firmly refuses to dwell on their faults becomes remarkably, effortlessly easy for others to love in return. Holmes goes even further here, suggesting that loneliness itself is rarely a permanent life sentence handed down by fate. It's far more often a temporary condition of thought, a signal that our own inner atmosphere is drifted, without our noticing, toward suspicion or self-protection rather than warmth. He isn't asking anyone to become naive or to ignore genuine red flags in another person's behavior. He's asking us to examine our default assumption about people in general and to notice whether we tend to walk into a room expecting connection or expecting rejection, because that underlying expectation, more than almost anything else, quietly shapes what actually happens once we're standing in that room. Now Holmes turns his attention to what he calls a controlled thought, reminding us that whatever good we receive from this vast creative power is always meant to be used freely, never simply hoarded away out of fear. Creation, he explains, flows continuously and abundantly, and there's genuinely no need to grip our good tightly out of anxious fear of scarcity, because the underlying source itself is truly, completely limitless. Our part in this ongoing partnership is simply to believe wholeheartedly, and then to act in calm faith directly on that belief. He points to the story of Jesus standing at the tomb of Lazarus as a powerful illustration here. Deep, settled conviction, immediately followed by decisive, confident action, fully expecting the desired result even before it becomes visibly apparent to anyone watching. And this, Holmes explains, is precisely why we're able to make our requests known with genuine thankfulness rather than anxious, worried pleading, because heartfelt gratitude itself is solid evidence that we already quietly expect to receive exactly what we've asked for. There's something genuinely freeing in this particular teaching, if you let it land fully. So much of ordinary human worry comes from a sense that we personally have to make things happen through sheer force of will, gripping every detail tightly, exhausting ourselves in the process. Holmes offers a different rhythm entirely. We believe, we act in calm faith on that belief, and then we release the outcome into the hands of a power that, by definition, cannot fail. That doesn't mean sitting back and doing nothing. It means doing our genuine part with full engagement, while refusing to carry the additional, unnecessary weight of anxious control over things that were never really ours to control in the first place. If you're finding these ideas as genuinely fascinating as I do, and you like more clear, thoughtful narrations just like this one, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now, so you don't miss whatever comes next, and then let's keep moving forward together, because this book only continues getting richer from here on out. Holmes then walks us carefully through the practical art of deliberately creating atmosphere, both in our homes and in our places of business. He tells us plainly that thought always, faithfully returns to us exactly what we originally sent out into it. So before anything else, we genuinely need to clear away every last trace of lingering unbelief first. Because mind, he reminds us, can only ever reach the level we first sincerely believe into it. Our own thought needs to correspond, in its clarity and settled conviction, precisely to the outcome we're truly hoping to see appear. He wants every reader to think of this creative power as their single greatest and most loyal friend, always fully present, never once absent, never genuinely doubtful of us. Speak your intention calmly, with quiet, settled trust, and let it be taken up completely by the power already surrounding you. You are never meant to look around anxiously wondering whether it's actually going to work this time. You are meant instead to simply quietly know. From atmosphere, Holmes moves naturally into the remarkable power of words themselves. Any word we speak with genuine, settled conviction, he explains carefully, carries real, tangible power out into the world. And if any single word carries real power, it logically follows that every word we ever speak carries at least some measure of power. So we ought to be genuinely thoughtful about which words we allow to regularly pass our lips. Our spoken words, delivered with real conviction, are never actually separate from the greater intelligence of the universal mind, because we remain, in a very real and immediate sense, always fully united with that same mind. Every single time we speak, Holmes insists, we are quietly wielding real, active, creative power, whether we consciously realize it in that moment or not. Naturally, this brings him directly to the question of why belief matters so profoundly in all of this. Prayer, in his considered view, is far less about anxiously asking for things we lack, and much more about genuinely, wholeheartedly believing we already possess exactly what we truly need. This settled attitude of already having received is absolutely essential, he stresses, because without it, we never actually create the necessary mental mold that allows this vast creative power to take clear shape and finally appear within our lives. Mind, he explains, behaves remarkably like water finding its own natural level, solidifying only ever into the exact form our own thought has patiently given it. Whatever pattern of thought we consistently hold, the surrounding creative power faithfully, reliably pours itself directly into that exact pattern. This naturally raises a very question Holmes tackles head-on next. Why do so many sincere, hopeful people still fail to see any real results at all? Most people, he observes with real compassion, simply wish for something, or perhaps merely long for it, maybe even believe it might possibly happen someday, eventually. But that alone, he insists, simply isn't quite enough. What's genuinely required is a firm, fully settled feeling of already having received, and most people, quite honestly, never fully arrive there, so their creative work remains permanently incomplete. He compares this particular law to something as ordinary and dependable as household electricity itself. Approach it correctly, with real understanding and respect, and it will serve you faithfully every single time. Approach it carelessly or half-heartedly, and it simply, quietly refuses to properly cooperate with you. Next comes a wonderfully practical chapter focused entirely on using the imagination well. Holmes invites the reader to picture themselves surrounded completely by an incredibly responsive substance, one that eagerly takes up every single thought we hand it and immediately acts upon it, never once choosing favorites among our various thoughts, but instead accepting all of them with complete, impartial equality. Whatever pattern we happen to provide is precisely the pattern that eventually comes forth into visible form. So if we keep resistantly thinking of ourselves as poor and lacking, we will quite predictably remain poor and lacking. The very moment our thinking genuinely shifts toward real richness and abundance, our outer circumstances will gradually begin shifting to match that new inner reality. He encourages a quiet, private, genuinely daily practice here, choosing clearly what you sincerely want to become, holding that mental image firmly and steadily, and repeating to yourself with complete inner conviction the simple phrase, I am that thing, fully understand that as far as the deeper creative mind is concerned, this inner reality is every bit as real and complete right now, in this very moment, as it will eventually be once it finally appears within your outward, visible experience. Holmes then addresses something he calls man's right of choice. Because we are truly individual beings, we've each been given considerable power of choice, and this is genuinely not something we ever need to apologize for or quietly set aside. Even refusing to choose, he points out, is itself, in fact, still very much a choice. What Holmes wants every reader to understand clearly here is that choosing wisely, in genuine harmony with love and beauty, allows this greater creative power to work smoothly, generously, and abundantly through us, rather than working against our own stated intentions. There's a genuinely lovely, encouraging section here on old age and opportunity as well. Holmes flatly rejects, without hesitation, the tired old idea that a person could ever be too old to succeed at something meaningful, because life itself, in his considered view, is fundamentally a matter of consciousness, never merely a matter of accumulated years. He points to several real, concrete examples to prove his case. A writer who published her very first book at the age of 53, and then went on to write more than 80 additional books over the remaining years of her life. And a spiritual teacher who began her greatest, most influential work at 60, and continued that same demanding work faithfully for the rest of her days. Holmes even personally describes guiding a discouraged businessman, already well past 60 years old, who firmly believed his best chances were entirely finished, into a full year of genuinely renewed prosperity simply by consciously changing the fundamental way he thought about himself and his circumstances. We are each exactly as old, Holmes insists with real conviction, as we sincerely believe ourselves to be, entirely regardless of what any calendar might otherwise suggest. This chapter tends to land with particular weight for listeners who feel they've somehow missed their window, that the good opportunities belong to a younger version of themselves and have now quietly passed them by. Holmes would gently push back on that entire premise. He'd ask you to notice that the belief itself, the belief that your window has closed, is simply one more thought, no more permanent or factual than any other thought you've ever held, and just as capable of being examined, questioned, and eventually replaced with something far more useful and far more true. Then comes a rich, wonderfully extended chapter on demonstrating success specifically in business, told almost like a small, engaging story. Holmes describes an underperforming shop owner who blames his poor sales, one after another, on the struggling economy, on his own advancing age, on rapidly changing times, on absolutely everything, it seems, except the one explanation that actually matters. A wiser friend patiently, gently walks him through the underlying logic step by step, explaining that everything ultimately traces back to some unseen, deeper cause, that this cause operates faithfully according to law, and that this particular law exists quietly within the shop owner himself, whether he personally realizes it yet or not. Once the man finally accepts this simple but profound truth, his entire approach to running his business shifts dramatically. Instead of constantly dwelling on failure and disappointment, he begins, daily and quite deliberately, picturing genuine activity, quiet confidence, and lasting success flowing steadily through every corner of his business, consciously replacing every fearful thought the very instant it appears with strong, radiant thought of prosperity instead. Within just a few months, Holmes tells us, the man's entire fortune turns around completely, and people soon begin genuinely asking him what his secret is. Life, Holmes reminds us here, always moves outward from within, never the other way around, and each one of us remains a true center of power within our own individual life. Holmes adds one more crucial piece of practical advice to this story, one that's easy to miss if you're rushing through it. He tells a man not to simply hope that things will improve, but to actually speak the word of activity into his business, out loud in his own private thought, treating it as seriously and as regularly as he would treat balancing his account books. This wasn't meant as a one-time pep talk to himself. It was meant as a daily discipline, repeated with the same seriousness a person might bring to any other essential business task, because Holmes genuinely believed that scattered, occasional effort produces scattered, occasional results, while steady, daily conviction produces steady, dependable results in return. From there, Holmes takes on a subject that many spiritual writers of a particular era carefully avoided altogether, the subject of money itself. He insists quite directly that money is absolutely not evil in itself, simply because it's fundamentally an expression of life, and life itself, in his view, is inherently good. Since money obviously cannot create itself out of nothing, it must be an effect flowing naturally from some unseen underlying cause, and that particular cause turns out to be a very specific kind of consciousness. People who genuinely hold a settled, confident sense of financial security firmly in their minds tend, quite reliably, to have that exact same security eventually show up in their pockets, while people who constantly feel a nagging sense of lack tend, just as reliably, to experience ongoing lack in their outward circumstances. He urges every reader to deliberately build what he memorably, almost playfully calls $1 million consciousness, to genuinely feel the settled presence of abundant supply every single day, to give heartfelt thanks for it, as though it has quite literally already arrived, and to firmly, consistently refuse any lingering talk whatsoever of poverty or limitation. It's worth noting how carefully Holmes threads a needle here. He isn't suggesting that money is the ultimate point of life, or that a person should chase wealth for its own sake, at the expense of everything else that matters. What he's really doing is removing the guilt and suspicion that so many people quietly attach to the entire subject of money, the sense that wanting financial security somehow makes a person shallow or unspiritual. He flips that assumption completely. Since everything that exists flows from the same good source, a healthy, generous relationship with money is simply one more expression of that same underlying goodness, and there's no need to apologize for wanting enough to live well, provide for people you love, and support the causes that matter to you. Holmes follows this immediately with an energetic, spirited chapter he simply calls action. The entire universe, he explains, is completely full of constant, ceaseless motion, and if we genuinely want to align ourselves with its natural flow, we too must actively move, though importantly, never through anxious strain or exhausting struggle. He notices quite astutely that some shops feel almost sleepy and lifeless the very moment you walk through the door, and you find yourself unconsciously want to leave again almost immediately, while other shops buzz with genuine sense of alert, purposeful activity that naturally draws customers in and keeps them happily engaged. Mental alertness, he insists, always precedes and produces physical activity, and a person who genuinely thinks activity will naturally, inevitably find themselves moving, working, and creating, rather than simply sitting still, passively waiting for inspiration to eventually strike on its own. Next, Holmes explores what he calls ideas of the infinite, wondering aloud, almost with genuine awe, exactly where humanity's greatest inventions, music, and art actually originate from. His answer is that these remarkable things are essentially discovered rather than truly invented out of pure nothingness, drawn directly out of that same infinite mind which quietly produces absolutely everything else in existence. A truly great inventor, or a truly great musician, he suggests, is simply someone whose inner ear or inner eye happens to be unusually finely attuned to catch these subtle impressions clearly and faithfully. He offers us here a simple, genuinely repeatable method for anyone sincerely wanting clearer guidance from this exact same infinite source. Quiet the mind completely and thoroughly. Hold a genuinely clear picture exactly what you want to know. Ask sincerely and directly. And then wait patiently, giving heartfelt thanks in advance, trusting fully that the answer will surface naturally in its own good time, sometimes even arriving quietly during ordinary sleep. There's a short but genuinely sturdy chapter here as well, reminding the reader never to lean too heavily or too often on other people for guidance. Every single person, Holmes insists firmly, carries the exact same direct access to infinite understanding quietly within themselves, and endlessly depending on someone else's guidance is really, when you think about it honestly, just trying to light your own personal path using someone else's borrowed flame. He also offers a small but genuinely practical piece of wisdom here. When you're actively working towards something truly meaningful in your life, keep it quietly to yourself for a while, because scattered, doubting comments and casual opinions from others can easily dilute the clarity of your own inner conviction before it's ever really had a proper chance to take firm root. Holmes then examines causes and conditions in considerably more depth, reinforcing once again that we're always fundamentally dealing with unseen causes rather than merely the visible conditions themselves, and that our own personal limitations come not from any actual lack within the surrounding universe, but purely and simply from our own narrow, restricted beliefs about what's genuinely possible for us. An ant, he points out almost playfully here, has exactly as much life within it as an elephant does, even though it happens to be dramatically smaller in physical size. The real underlying issue, he reminds us, was never truly about size at all, but always fundamentally about consciousness. Following naturally from this comes the closely related idea of mental equivalence. We can only ever draw out a life exactly as much as we first genuinely built the matching inner image for within ourselves. If we sincerely want something greater in our lives, we first need to patiently grow an inwardly larger sense of ourselves, one genuinely capable of holding and sustaining that greater thing. This particular kind of inner growth takes real, sustained, patient effort, Holmes freely admits, but it remains entirely possible for absolutely anyone, taking one honest, deliberate step at a time. Then Holmes addresses a perfectly fair and genuinely common question that likely occurs to many readers. Does this one universal law only ever produce good outcomes? Or could it, quite conceivably, just as easily bring about real harm instead? His considered answer is that the law itself, much like the law governing electricity, remains completely neutral and impersonal in nature, and simply faithfully reflects back whatever specific intention we happen to feed into it. He offers us a simple, genuinely useful built-in safeguard here. Never sincerely wish for anything you yourself will be entirely unwilling to receive in return, and you'll consistently find this particular law to be completely safe and thoroughly dependable to work with. He follows this immediately with a genuinely compassionate chapter on transcending previous conditions, thoughtfully addressing something many readers surely worried about quietly to themselves. Are we permanently, hopelessly bound forever by our own past mistakes? Holmes explains that the law of cause and effect is genuinely never actually broken outright, but absolutely can be consciously redirected instead. He offers us a vivid little illustration here to make this clear. If you were to throw a ball directly toward a window, the ordinary law of motion would normally, predictably break the glass. But if someone happens to catch that ball first, before it ever reaches a window, Neither the window itself nor the underlying law of motion is actually broken in any way. The flow was simply quietly redirected instead. In precisely the same way, he explains, a genuinely new attitude of mind can fully redirect old, established patterns of thought and behavior, freeing us completely from consequences we might otherwise have reasonably expected to face indefinitely into the future. Holmes then speaks with real tenderness to those readers who feel chronically misunderstood. In a thoughtful section titled Understanding and Misunderstanding, he notices with real empathy that sensitive people quite often unconsciously undo their own genuinely good work through a persistent undercurrent of doubt or lingering hurt feelings. His gentle remedy here is to consciously see everyone around us, without a single exception, as a genuinely good and inherently worthy soul, and to trust patiently that as we sincerely hold this generous view of others, it will eventually naturally be reflected right back toward us as well. We simply cannot, he points out with real clarity, sincerely affirm goodness for ourselves while simultaneously dwelling critically on faults in everyone around us. This particular principle, he insists, genuinely has to work both ways at once, or it doesn't work at all. He reassures every reader next that absolutely no unusual experience, no dramatic feeling or special inner thrill, is actually required to make this underlying law work properly. We are not, he clarifies carefully, dealing primarily with emotion here at all. We are dealing first and foremost with law itself, and genuine law simply, faithfully responds to clear, calm conviction, entirely regardless of whether or not it happens to arrive alongside any particularly dramatic inner sensation. Closely tied to this idea is his following section on visualizing, where Holmes thoughtfully reassures anyone who might worry they personally lack a sufficiently vivid visual imagination. Visualization can certainly help a great deal, he readily admits, but it genuinely isn't strictly required for success. Whether you happen to picture your goal vividly in rich mental detail, or simply state it plainly in words and believe it completely with quiet conviction, the underlying result, he promises with real confidence, will end up being exactly, precisely the same either way. He closes out this entire first half of the book by asking a genuinely fascinating question. Exactly where, physically or otherwise, does this demonstration actually take place? In the patient's own mind, in the practitioner's mind, or perhaps in the mind of the divine itself? His considered answer, quite characteristically, is that it honestly doesn't matter very much at all, because all three of these are, ultimately, revealed to be the very same single mind. Our own part in this process is simply to become genuinely, inwardly convinced, and then to trust the rest to unfold naturally on its own. From here, Holmes shifts noticeably into the second half of the book, which turns out to be far more hands-on and practical, essentially functioning as a detailed working manual for applying everything he's carefully laid out so far. He opens the second section with detailed, practical guidance on how to actually get what he calls a treatment, meaning a focused, deliberate period of clear, fully convicted thought aimed precisely at one specific desired outcome. The essential ingredients here, he explains, are complete, unwavering belief that your spoken word is genuinely taken up by real creative power, a clear, definite mental picture of exactly what you sincerely desire, and an unwavering refusal to later contradict, even quietly, what you've already firmly declared to be true. He's careful to add one more warning here, one that shows just how seriously he took this discipline. Never give a treatment. He says, for anything you yourself would not genuinely be willing to receive if it were given back to you in return. This isn't merely a moral nicety tacked on to the end of the chapter. It's a structural safeguard built directly into practice itself. Because whatever we sincerely wish for another person, we are, according to the same law, simultaneously wishing for ourselves, since there is, in the end, only the one mind involved in the entire transaction. He follows us immediately with thoughtful guidance on understanding and guidance more broadly, describing carefully how our deeper inner self remains in constant, unbroken connection with this infinite intelligence at all times, even though our outer, everyday thinking often becomes genuinely confused and cloudy, unintentionally blocking that naturally clear connection. Sitting quietly, listening patiently inward, and trusting fully that a greater intelligence is actively working alongside our own thought, he explains, gradually restores that lost clarity over time with consistent practice. Then comes a genuinely inspiring, story-driven section on how to know just exactly what to do, especially in moments when we feel stuck and genuinely uncertain about where to even begin. Holmes shares here the memorable story of a business owner whose company had been steadily, worryingly failing for some time. Rather than panicking outright, the man deliberately withdrew into quiet solitude for 3 full days, trusting completely that real guidance would eventually come to him, and a complete, genuinely workable plan gradually took clear, coherent shape in his mind during that time. His business partners had openly laughed at him beforehand, expecting absolutely nothing useful to come of it, but within a single year, faithfully following that inwardly received plan step by careful step, he had turned the previously failing business into a truly remarkable success story, eventually devoting the remaining years of his career entirely to teaching other struggling people this exact same process. Naturally, Holmes follows this immediately with practical advice on following up a thought once genuine inner guidance finally does arrive. Even if that particular guidance seems, at first glance, to go directly against common expectations or conventional wisdom, he insists we should trust it fully and follow through with calm, steady determination, because genuinely meaningful progress throughout human history has always come specifically from people willing to move confidently beyond what the rest of the world had simply assumed was possible. He then teaches a considerable value of maintaining a single, unified stream of thought, warning quite clearly that scattered, conflicting thinking undoes far more genuine progress than it ever accomplishes. One clear, consistent stream of focus and tension, he explains carefully, sent out faithfully day after day without wavering, will ultimately accomplish more over the course of a single year than many powerful but mutually contradictory streams of thought working directly against one another. And importantly, he stresses, genuine feeling matters considerably more than the mere words themselves, since it's authentic feeling, not empty mechanical repetition, that truly gives our thoughts their underlying creative power. From there, Holmes urges every reader toward continuously, deliberately enlarging their own thought. He observes, quite perceptively, that many people plateau in life simply because they eventually stop imagining anything genuinely bigger than what they've already achieved so far. There is no natural stopping point whatsoever built into this particular law. He insists firmly. So if you're currently serving 50 customers a day, deliberately picture 60 instead. Once you comfortably, consistently have 60, go ahead and picture 70. Growth, in a considered view, has no built-in ceiling at all, except for the one we quietly, unconsciously place there ourselves. Holmes named several very ordinary, very human excuses that quietly stop people at their current plateau, and it's worth hearing them out loud, because you may recognize one or two of them from your own inner dialogue. Some people simply lack imagination and cannot picture anything beyond what has already happened to them. Others tell themselves that this is simply as far as anyone in their particular line of work has ever gone. Others point to their age or to competition as a hard ceiling they've quietly accepted without ever really testing it. Holmes's answer to every single one of these is the same patient, steady answer. There is no ceiling in mind itself, only in our willingness to keep imagining a little further than we did the day before. Following this immediately, in a section he titles Always Be Gathering, Holmes carefully clarifies that continually expanding your inner vision isn't at all about greed or selfish hoarding. Quite the opposite. In fact, the very reason we're meant to keep gathering more, he explains, is precisely so that we always have considerably more available to freely, generously give away to others. Even after achieving something genuinely wonderful, he says, let that achievement simply become the beginning of something even greater still, rather than treating it as some kind of final stopping point. He then explains a closely related idea of mental likeness in considerably more depth, reminding us once again that we can only ever draw from this infinite source exactly as much as we first genuinely, sincerely believed into it ourselves. We simply cannot sincerely affirm something we don't actually inwardly know to be true, and so building a larger, genuinely richer sense of what's truly possible for ourselves becomes an essential, ongoing inner project, one that quite simply takes patient, consistent, daily effort over time. Then comes some genuinely practical guidance on keeping the thing firmly in mind. Holmes suggests that roughly 15 minutes, spent twice daily, clearly picture your desired outcome as an already fully accomplished fact, is genuinely enough dedicated time for this purpose, provided the remaining hours of your day are also carefully kept free of negative, contradicting thoughts that might otherwise undo that focused work. Trust, he explains, steadily and naturally grows the more we personally witness this entire process actually working in our own lives over time. He follows us immediately with a firm, genuinely resolute chapter urging us to actively destroy every single thought we sincerely don't wish to experience. We are meant, he explains, to turn resolutely toward the single power of good, deliberately wiping away every last trace of doubt or fear, entering daily into a higher, clearer state of thought, thoroughly washed clean of the noise and confusion of ordinary daily life. In this particular inner stillness, our deepest genuine needs are quietly made known, and according to Holmes, are genuinely, faithfully honored in return. Holmes then walks us through a fully worked, concrete example in what he calls a direct practice for prosperity, imagining someone actively running a mail-order business and sending marketing materials steadily out into the wider world. He describes speaking directly into the surrounding creative power over materials themselves, declaring with complete conviction that each single one will reach exactly the right person and will be received with genuine interest and real, lasting benefit, then simply, calmly trusting the eventual results to follow naturally from that settled conviction. There's a genuinely valuable, honest chapter here next on what Holmes calls race consciousness, referring to the accumulated collective weight of everyone else's fears and limiting beliefs, which surrounds all of us like a kind of invisible atmospheric pressure. He encourages every reader to consciously guard their own mind against absorbing this pervasive collective negativity, staying genuinely positive and calmly poised, rather than anxious or aggressively defensive, since positive people, he observes from real experience, consistently draw positive circumstances steadily toward themselves over time. This particular chapter feels remarkably modern. Honestly, When you consider how easily discouraging news and other people's anxieties can wash over us today, sometimes within seconds of picking up a phone in the morning, Holmes isn't suggesting we ignore reality or pretend difficult things aren't happening in the wider world. He's suggesting something more targeted, that we notice the difference between being informed and being saturated, and that we take deliberate, regular steps to clear that collective static out of our own personal thinking, the same way we might tidy a room that's gradually collected clutter without our really noticing it happening. Following this immediately, Holmes teaches thoughtfully about developing intuition, describing people who seem to almost effortlessly always know precisely the right thing to do in any given situation. This particular ability, he explains, can genuinely be deliberately cultivated by absolutely anyone through quiet, trusting stillness, patiently waiting for clear inner impressions to naturally form, and then faithfully following those very first clear impressions with genuine confidence once they finally, reliably arrive. He addresses, too, what he calls the presence of activity, offering real encouragement to anyone whose business or personal efforts currently feel quiet, stagnant, or discouragingly slow. Even when outward appearances strongly suggest that absolutely nothing at all is happening, Holmes insists we must still hold firmly to the inner conviction of genuine activity and eventual success, mentally picturing the outcome we sincerely want as already fully present and complete, trusting fully that the same creative power is, even in this very moment, quietly working steadily on our behalf behind the scenes. He draws a gentle comparison here to the story of the prodigal son, reminding us that the father in that story saw his son coming while the son was still a long way off, still on the road, still very much in transit and not yet arrived. That image matters, because it suggests that the moment we sincerely turn back toward good, toward trust, toward this greater power, something on the other side has already begun moving to meet us, long before we can see any outward evidence of it ourselves. Our job, in the meantime, is simply to keep our own thought clear and expectant, so that when the answers arrive, we're genuinely ready and open to receive it, rather than having talked ourselves back into doubt in the interim. Near the very end of the book, Holmes offers a genuinely warm, deeply personal chapter on Draw Your Own to You, clearly meant for anyone who has ever felt lonely or disconnected from other people around them, rather than trying to forcibly connect with individual people one at a time. He suggests instead uniting your thought with the underlying life and love genuinely present in absolutely everyone, trusting patiently that this deeper unity will naturally, gradually draw the right friendships and meaningful connections steadily into your life over time. Be genuinely generous with warmth and authentic cheerfulness. He advises us here, and firmly refuses to let hurt feelings ever take root, because the world, he insists, is always naturally drawn toward the strongest, warmest center of genuine goodwill it can possibly find. And finally, Holmes brings absolutely everything together in his closing chapter, which he simply, memorably calls a final word. A person, he tells us plainly, is exactly what they habitually, consistently think themselves to be. Think big, expansive thoughts, and you gradually become genuinely capable of big, expansive things. Think small, timid, fearful thoughts, and you will, quite predictably, remain small and limited. We each govern our own personal destiny, he explains, the very moment we learn to genuinely govern our own habitual thinking, because absolutely everything visible in this world flows steadily outward from some prior, unseen activity of mind. Keep believing steadily. Keep thinking clearly and quite deliberately about exactly what you want to see faithfully returned to you. Release every negative thought the very instant it appears. Hold firmly and consistently to the positive instead, and give heartfelt thanks continually along the way. Follow these genuinely simple steps. Holmes promises us with real confidence, and eventually you truly won't need to wonder anymore whether any of this is actually true, because by then you'll already know it directly from your own lived, personally demonstrated experience. And there we have it, the complete message of creative mind and success, from beginning to end. At its very heart, this book makes one bold, wonderfully simple claim: that you are not merely a passage in your own life, helplessly drifting wherever circumstance happens to carry you next. You are, in Holmes's own words, a genuine center of creative power, directly connected to the very same infinite source that brings forth an entire universe. Every single thought you think is quietly, continuously shaping the atmosphere surrounding you, steadily drawing certain people, certain conditions, and certain opportunities toward you, while gently pushing others firmly away. Fear, doubt, and limitation, he wants you to remember, are never permanent, unchangeable facts of life. They are simply old, outdated patterns of thinking that can genuinely be recognized, consciously released, and then deliberately replaced with something far better. And the very moment you begin deliberately and patiently to think consistently in terms of strength, generosity, gratitude, and genuine expectation of good, that same vast creative power begins working steadily through you rather than in spite of you. Holmes wrote these particular words well over a century ago now, and yet his central invitation feels every bit as urgent and relevant today as it clearly did back then. Take full responsibility for your own thinking. Guard your mind carefully and consistently. Believe steadily in your own genuine capacity for good, and trust the entire process fully, even during those quiet stretches when results haven't yet visibly appeared on the surface. You might notice, looking back over everything we've covered tonight, that Holmes never once asked you to take anything purely on faith without also testing it in your own daily experience. He repeatedly invites the reader to try it, to watch their own results, to notice the correlation between the thoughts they've been secretly rehearsing and the conditions steadily showing up around them. That's ultimately what makes this book feel less like a sermon and more like an invitation to a genuine experiment, one you're free to run for yourself, starting with something as small as a single hopeful thought held steadily for just one day. Wherever you happen to be right now, whatever quiet worry or private hope originally brought you to listen to this narration tonight, I sincerely hope you carry just one single thing forward with you from everything we've covered together. You are, at this very moment, quietly planting the seeds of your own tomorrow. Choose them well, and choose them with real care. If this narration gave you something genuinely worth sitting with tonight, do me one small favor and hit that subscribe button before you go, so you'll be right here with us for the next one. Thank you so much, sincerely, for listening all the way through, and until next time, take good care of your thoughts, because they are quietly, faithfully taking care of you